welcome to another episode of Inquiring Minds. I am Steve Harper, and with me, as always, is my amazing co-host Donna Carlin. How you doing, Donna?
I'm great. I cannot wait for this conversation.
Me either.
Gonna
I've been
go
looking
off
forward to it
and
all week.
yeah, you know what? It's an old quote. It's from Albert Einstein that really caught my attention. He was, a smart cookie. Go figure, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what they say.
That's what they say. And we have all these wonderful quotes and things that he said and did. We wonder what the in-between stuff was. Like,
Yeah.
where wasn't he as brilliant as he comes across being? You always wonder with somebody like that. But I'm
It's
digressing.
funny. I've been trying for 3 years to finish Walter Isaacson's book on Einstein, and I just can't do it. It's like, it's fascinating, but you can only take it in small little doses. And maybe I'll finish it by the time I'm 60. I don't know.
Okay, you never know. Well, he said something really profound. We cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And
Ooh,
boy, has that come to the fore with some work that I'm doing with clients this past week. So
yeah.
I thought I'd throw it out there and see what your thoughts were about the quote itself. How did you interpret that? And then, to talk about some personal examples.
Yeah, this one I'm conflicted on because I think, for me personally, the challenge is, well, it was the thinking that got me there in the first place. How am I going to change that perspective and that view? I know, the answer to that is it's important to do so, but it's in the moment. I would think, at least in my own personal experience, I fall victim to this. The thinking that got me into trouble is exactly the thinking I'm using to try and get myself out of trouble. And I'm maybe it's that I'm not a smart man. I don't know. I'm not Einstein, that's
People
for
have to
sure.
comment. Yeah.
But I'm curious. How does that quote land with you?
First of all, human nature is that people default to a certain way of thinking. So if I have a client that says to me, I'm having a huge conflict between my team and another team, and this is what I'm going to do to try to fix it.
Uh huh.
You don't fix conflict, you have to get to the root of it, but that's another thing. And then look at using the same people to do more of what they've done to cause the conflict in the first place to try to turn the conflict around. And, I just listen and I just can't say to a client, this is the wrong way to go because they don't really think of any other way. They're
Sure.
looking at these are my people. So I need to leave it up to the same people who are in conflict to figure it out amongst themselves. Well, it's been a year. If the conflict is escalating, they haven't figured it out because they don't have the skill sets to do it,
Yeah.
or their egos are in the way, or whatever else there is. And he's thinking that he's going to be solving this issue using the same thinking as what got them in this place in the first place. And so it's helping people see that they need to think differently. Thinking differently means eventually doing something differently
Yeah.
because you're looking at it through a different lens. But that takes reflection, time, space, and a little bit of processing. And often they just don't give themselves the luxury of doing that. So they just keep digging themselves in deeper.
Yeah. Your phrase of think differently reminds me of how the story of how Apple kind of got started when they actually started to get some traction, not when they were in the garage and putting together everything with baling wire and bubble gum, but they were actually getting those first manufacturing agreements in place and developing the model and the look. And I remember a story about how they were looking at, and at that point, the home personal computer was just starting to take off, right? So you had IBM
Yeah.
that was the big dog in the space, very expensive, but had a look and feel. Tandy, which was owned by Radio Shack at the time, I think, or they had a partnership at least at that point to create a home computer. They were very bulky and very, very word processor oriented kind of things that were, very, not aesthetically appealing. Big footprint. You had to have a big desk for them. They were just not not really good. And I remember one of the things that I think Steve Wozniak said, how do we take the great technology that we're building and put it into something from a aesthetic experience that the moment that you look at it, you want to touch it, you want to play with it. Whereas when they looked at everything else, which was what everybody else was doing, digital and all the other companies that have long since, rest in peace, gone away, they were all just trying to do what everybody else was doing, right? And if they had gone into, meaning Apple had gone into the home computer business thinking they were going to do the exact same thing, then we probably wouldn't have the great devices we have today, right? So I think about that because had they used the same thinking, they would have just had another product like everybody else. And then you're competing on, does mine do more? And, is it a better price point? And there's not a lot of key differentiations there. So the same thinking would not have actually helped them get that first market advantage. Obviously, they went through challenges after they found their legs, and that history is pretty well known. But I think specifically about that term, think differently, because they were one of the first to adjust it. And even when Steve Jobs came back the second time, when he said, I want to do the iMac and I want to make that Macintosh experience way different than it, was previously, I want people to look at it and be in awe and think of it as an art piece, right? To aesthetically appealing to the eyes and the approach. They just continued to exhibit that process, and so I think that to me is where I kind of fall on that particular thought process that Mr. Einstein put forward.
One of the things that I do with teams is I make them switch positions when they're in conflict. I make them take each other's roles. So say it's like two lawyers in a courtroom. They have to defend their clients, and they both have to be right because their purpose is for their clients to win.
Yeah.
So which means that there's going to be a winner and a loser. There's no two ways about it. So what I do is I make each of the lawyers and the defendants switch roles. So they have to defend their opponent's point of view. And it gets to the point where they not only start figuring out how am I going to defend somebody that I want to lose and I think is wrong,
Hmm.
but they get so passionate about having to do that defense that what they do is they really become enmeshed in the other person's point of view and say, oh, I could see why they think this. And they start, switching sides. And when you do that in a team environment or even family environment and say to yourself, wait a minute, rather than, keeping my point of view and having to be right about this, why might they be thinking or saying what they're saying? What
Yeah.
are they seeing that I'm not seeing? Or what are they doing that I can't figure out? And instead of fighting them, ask for them to help me understand. And then it just switches everything around. If you start conflict based on a certain point of view and a certain stance and passion and emotion, you're not going to be able to solve it with that same stuff. There's no
No.
question. So what if you I don't use anymore. I don't use put yourself in the other person's shoes because you can't. You don't know what they're thinking, feeling, seeing. You don't have their experience, none of it. So what you could do is imagine you were in that position and how might you view it if you were in their role, for example. And are you being stubborn? That's the second thing. When you're in the other
Yeah.
person's role and you could see what their point of view is, can you also ask yourself, am I being really stubborn about this? And what if in their role, I couldn't understand what my point of view was? How could I make it clear for them? So what you're doing is looking at from multiple perspectives, which will give you a much better chance of resolving that conflict.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've used a similar technique to diffuse issues before and get them to argue from the perspective of the other person for why that's happening. And suddenly they realize, some of the things that they now have to think in the opposite, form, right? The opposite mindset, all of a sudden shows really that, why the argument in the first place was somewhat ridiculous, and or the challenge or the issue. But it's true for brainstorming. It's true for, ideation, how you look at those things. We've even touched on that in past episodes where, we ask that question. So what happens if it does succeed? How do you look at that from that perspective? So you're saying it can't succeed. So what does it look like if it does? Don't give me the reasons why it can't. We've already covered that. You already have claimed that it won't work, but what if it did? And what would that look like? And what does that mean to you? And then you look at the coin from the other side, and now you have to somewhat sell that or defend it or promote it. It does open up a completely different neural pathway for you to start looking at things from a completely different perspective. And sometimes where you were so hell bent on the direction you were, you all of a sudden go that light bulb moment, like, oh, okay, now I see why you took what I said, or why, you were resistant to what I suggested, or why you argued so passionately from your perspective, because of what you were hearing from that side. Now I get it, because I'm kind of, even though you say, we don't necessarily tell people to walk in their shoes, because that's kind of impossible, but you can play the role play of that a little bit. And when you start to do that, and if you're committed to it, all of a sudden you come up with a lot of good reasons to argue against yourself. So
Yeah.
I think it's a fascinating aspect. And I think, a lot of times in most situations, we get caught up in just the desire to move past something, or to, quickly resolve something, that we don't actually give ourselves the time and the space to actually think about something, to think through these things and look and examine all these, the various angles of a particular issue or problem or, situation.
And one of the reality check questions. It was really funny yesterday. Um, One of my clients' staffers had booked time to do a core values index debrief. And when we went to the conflict resolution matrix, she let loose about somebody on another team that was just giving her no end of grief. And she's an incredibly intelligent person who was stuck on having to manage this one individual and had to be right.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this person doesn't know what they're doing. I've had X amount of experience in all of this, and was expecting me to tell her,
Solve her
like, I
problem.
hear you. That no, I don't think it's the first time I ever spoke to her, so
Mm.
that would happen anyway. Um, it was her boss that I've had many interactions with. Um, but what she didn't expect, which is what I do, is I said to her, "So what do you think is really going on here?" And she says, "What do you mean, what's really going on?" I said, "You're telling me, like, every angle that you're upset with and what you're not getting and all of this from, his point of view. What do you think is going on? What do you think the root cause is of this? Put yourself, in the perspective of being the recipient of somebody who's incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And what might that do? Have you examined how you interact with him? Do you interact with him? She called him an idiot. So, I pretty much said, did you interact with him framing, things as if you knew that he was an idiot? I mean, like, I wasn't there to witness the conversation, but what do you think is going on there? How are you inviting collaboration? How are you inviting engagement? And she was getting upset with me. So I said, you get what you give. You don't give respect, you're not going to get it back. You don't want to work with somebody who you think is an idiot, and that might come out in your language. I don't know, because you are incredibly intelligent. So how do you help somebody understand rather than just ignore them or diminish them, and criticize them? There's a huge difference. So I wasn't there. Help me see what was really going on. And she stopped and she thought for a moment. She says, I never even took a second to reflect on what he might want from me. I said, okay, that's a great starting point.
Yeah.
And so what could the next conversation look like? What is it that you need to share with him in order to come together a little bit more comfortably and respectfully. And so I said, and I don't want an answer now, because that's the other thing. She answers like that. And, then on to the next thing. And I'm going, no, no, no. This is a reflective question because, and this is hypothetical, and I'm assuming if this is happening with one person, there's a very good chance it's happening with others as well. So it will reflect on you, not on those that you're criticizing. And so my job was done. I helped her think in a
That's
different
great.
way.
Yeah.
Going on, complaining about these idiots is not going to change the status quo. It's just going to continue to go down the mink hole, which we talked
Yeah.
about another time. So there you go. That's a way to deal with it, is to ask yourself, if there's no other person there, what is really going on here from
Yeah.
their point of
Well, I just watched a movie that I'll share with our audience that I think actually sort of uh, allows you to have your own personal case study of this exact scenario that you just talked about. Not in a work environment necessarily, but it's a movie by Tom Hanks called A Man Named Otto,
view. Oh,
and
I'm dying to see that. Yeah.
it just it's on Netflix now. You got to watch it. You'll see some of the exact things that you just pointed out that were happening with this person and her colleague. You'll see this in a dynamic of number of relationships involving former work, neighbors, former good friends, and it's just a fascinating look at how someone's perspective can be altered or changed when they start looking at things from a different lens. So it's kind of, I didn't think I would actually bring that up today, but I saw it and can't wait to watch it again because it was just that powerful. So it's a little bit of a tearjerker. So I'll just not to put a
Okay.
spoiler alert there, but it will get you thinking. And this topic is a perfect one to do exactly that: thinking differently, looking at things differently. And I guess my last point on this topic would be for our audience to really think about, how do I slow down? How do I embrace what's before me? And what do I need to do to think differently about that? Whether it's a conflicted relationship at work, whether it's the stories we tell ourselves in our head that we just allow those facts to be put in without evidence, or we're trying to solve a problem, or we're take that next step in our career path, or we're trying to build our business. What would that look like if you thought differently about it? So lo and behold, Einstein was a pretty smart guy. I mean,
Go.
I kind of feel like you and I and him would have really gotten along in a lot of ways. So
Yeah.
you guys
Well,
would have had these high level conversations and I would have been
don't
getting
go
coffee,
there.
but but no, I'm glad you put this one on the table because it is a really good, it's a good one, and actually comes at a really good time for me too, because there's some things that I'm kind of contemplating relative to some of my own personal projects. So this was perfect.
Great. To be continued. I'm sure that this will come up in another conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Donna, how could our audience get engaged in this conversation? Tell us what they took from this, or maybe how it might have inspired or motivated them to look at things a little bit differently. How can they become part of this active conversation with us?
Join our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna Carlin and Steve Harper. Let us know what your 3 cents are, and let us know also if there's things that you would like us to discuss, because we're really happy to hear from our listeners. It's an honor to have you in our community. And
Absolutely.
obviously, YouTube and any podcast channel, we're on all of them. So join in and let us know what your thoughts are. We'd love to hear.
Absolutely. Well, another great conversation, another perspective shifted, and another way to think differently. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. We'll be back again with another episode of Inquiring Minds very soon. But until then, Donna, take care.
You too. Have a good one.
You too.